Hey, Detoxers, welcome to a special episode of the Disinfo Detox, where we are talking about misinformation with Yotam Ophir, an associate professor of communication at University at Buffalo. Yotam, welcome to the Disinfo Detox.
Yeah, thank you for having me, Nolan.
Heck yeah, it's a pleasure to have you here, and I really appreciate you making the time to come on the program. Your new book is Misinformation and Society. It's a great book. Had a pleasure of reading it over the last week. Highly encourage other folks to pick it up. So your book, it explores misinformation and how it's evolved in this so-called post-truth era. So, kind of paint a picture for our audience. How would you because I think a lot of people are sort of on overload from fake news, right? There was a lot of talk about it in 2016 through 2020. I think it's fallen off some people's radar, unfortunately. So, can you kind of describe the current landscape of misinformation as far as you see it, and how it kind of differs from the past, and why you think it's significant?
Yeah, I think you make a really good point. There was a notion that 2016 was very special, that we kind of crossed the Rubicon into a new post truth era or something like that. A lot of it came from Donald Trump and kind of the pundits and politicians' surprise of his success. And in other places, Brexit in Europe and so on and so on. At the same time, I think by 2016, we came to realize the impact or growing impact of social media on our lives. And so it kind of created a moment where suddenly everybody were interested in misinformation. And I am worried, I think, like you, that it might be too much for some people, or maybe they're going to just move on or just assume that, we can trust anything and just ignore every piece of information that doesn't fit, what they already want to hear. Um, and yeah, I think that will be a mistake. Misinformation is still a big part of our lives. I don't think that 2025 in 2025 we're doing much better than 10 years ago in terms of coping with it. And in my kind of view, the biggest point is that from 2016 to 2025, we've learned that misinformation doesn't come with a cost anymore. So basically, back in the day, there was a notion. Let's take politics, right, as an example. There was a notion that if you say something that turns out to be wrong or misleading, or let's say you're lying, you will pay a political price for it. I mean, famously, George H.W. Bush paid a deep price for saying no new taxes, right? Read my lips. Now we have a president who was caught, I don't want to say lying, but let's say making false statements thousands of times over 4 years. And not only was he reelected in 2024, but many Americans still claim that he's the most reliable person to get information from. So I don't think we're getting I don't think we're doing better than we did 10 years ago. And if anything, the price for misinformation, at least in some circles, I mean, not everywhere, is going down. So I'm concerned, and I want to keep pushing that argument.
Yeah, let's talk about that a little more, because I think it's really fascinating. You said that, and I want to also just note this. I think there's something really important you say in the beginning of the book, which is we can never be 100% confident we have the truth, right? You talk about how we're using basically the evidence and factors available to us to decide how we see our reality, and you talk about how realities shift over time, which I think is critically important. But as far as the not really going very far for the last 10 years, there was a lot of money spent. There were a lot of new companies. There was a lot of PR and rhetoric around fake news. There was a lot of effort by educational institutions. Yeah, I have my own take on this, but what's kind of your take? Why do you think that all that kind of effort and money and focus didn't move us in a more positive direction in terms of learning to live with fake news?
Well, in part because I think you're kind of suggested here that it has become an industry of sorts. And when it did, all kind of um, other motivations kind of seep through that maybe are not necessarily to make our society stronger. The second reason is that I think a lot of these attempts were targeting very kind of narrow aspects of the problem, not really willing to deal with the systemic issues that we are facing in our society, and instead kind of trying to, I don't know, put fires out. The last piece of this puzzle, and maybe the most depressing one, is that we're just not truth seekers. I mean, humans are just not very good with identifying, truth or mistakes or understanding reality. We are like every other organism, creatures that evolved to survive. And if you look back, million years into our prehistoric time, being accurate was not a big deal. Like it wasn't a big priority for humans, and I think we're still kind of affected by these inclinations. So I don't think we're gonna get out of the misinformation age if we ever entered it. I think we just always been there.
Yeah, I would absolutely agree with that. I think it's baked into the kind of human cake, if you will, right? We are naturally gossip culture. We love illusion. We love creativity, and that means we can create and believe a total BS.
Yeah.
You okay? So let's move because you mentioned about how there's kind of almost like this hard wiring in the human experience that helps us struggle with truth, and you really talk about that in part two of your book. So can you kind of help us understand what are some of the key like mental or social processes that make individuals more susceptible to misinformation?
So there are a lot of kind of tendencies and inclinations that humans have. We can call them biases, right, or heuristics that we rely on to make sense of the world. And I'm not gonna name all of them because there are way too many. But let's talk about two that really affect misinformation. The first is that we are inclined to accept new information as true. And this is especially the case when the information is negative or dangerous, right? Again, the explanation here is evolutionary and it makes total sense. Back in the day, you left your cave in the morning, you looked outside, you see the bushes around you moving, right? Or maybe you hear a rustling sound from the leaves. What should you do if you turn back and run away, assuming that it's danger, right? Then you survived. And then you increase the chances that you and I are the antecedents of these people who turned away and ran away. If you stopped and questioned yourself and went to the bushes to check what it was and were not, fully sure that you have all the evidence needed and so on, you probably at some point died. And if you died, your genes are not with us anymore. So accepting information is true, especially when it was dangerous, especially when it was making us feel scared, was a good idea. We often did it by identifying patterns, right? So we look at the bush and we see something moving, that something is not the normal pattern of the bush, and then we assume that we need to pay attention to some danger in it. Or on the other hand, we see a bush and we see berries on it, and we use pattern recognition to kind of make sense if we should eat the berries or avoid them. All good and well when you live in the jungle or in the middle of the desert somewhere by yourself, or with a small tribe, because back in the day being wrong didn't have a lot of impact on the world around you. I mean, for the prehistoric person, being wrong was not a big deal as long as he avoided dangers, right? These days we still rely on these tendencies, these biases that are baked into us, but now our mistakes can, I don't know, bring creatures to extinction, warm up the earth to degrees that going to cause terrible harms, increase the chances of large scale epidemics. So we remain the same creatures largely that we were in the past, but our impact on the environment has grown so much that our mistakes now matter much more. So this is kind of the first bias. The second one, I think, connects to a lot of other things we're going to probably talk about today, and that's our need to get along with others. to survive in your natural habitat in the past, even today, but definitely in pre-industrial societies, you needed to work well with others. You needed to be accepted and to accept what your tribe is saying, what your group is saying. Let's go back to that cave and leave it again on a different day. And you leave your cave, and the leader of the tribe, let's say you live with 40, 50 other people, and the leader says, look at the clouds up in the sky. These are gods, and those gods want us to sacrifice humans to it. Okay. Maybe you don't think that it's true. Maybe you think the clouds are just clouds. Maybe you don't believe it's the god. It's the gods. But if you rebel against your group, if you say, "Hey, I don't think that your story about clouds is correct," you will be shunned. You will be kind of taken out of the group. You will not be allowed to procreate with other women in the tribe. And in the worst of cases, rebelling against the common knowledge of the group would just lead to your death because they will just kill you. So, in all of these cases, the outcome will be you not bringing more kids to the world, which means your genes are no longer with us. So, we are the kids or the antecedents, right? Or the descendants, sorry, of those who believed their eyes, especially when they heard something scary or dangerous, and those who got along with others and conformed with their opinion, even if they suspected that the group might be wrong. Both have nothing to do with truth, right? Both have to do with surviving. So survival over accuracy is kind of what brought us, I think, to a large degree to where we are.
I think it's okay. So that's a really helpful transition because you talk about how we bring these kind of biases that are almost hardwired into us from the past into a present. And your book talks about this, the present, where there's this fixation on content needing to go viral in the digital environment and in a culture in general, but a political culture in particular that's really hyper polarized. So can you kind of walk us through some of how this hardwiring who we are as humans doesn't do well with this contemporary society we've developed, at least in terms of maintaining a democracy?
Yeah. I mean, it's a fair question because if you argue that we've been, victims to misinformation from day one, then what's all the worry now, and why do we need to care about it? And the answer is that even though misinformation is nothing new, things have changed, and they changed dramatically. And I think that kind of brings us back to why 2016 was such a big deal for misinformation research and public attention. And that's the culmination of two processes that kind of changed our social lives and our kind of relationship with information. The first is the technological one. It's nothing new to be worried about new technologies and misinformation. People were worried about anything from comic books to radio to television before. But that's not to say that the internet and social media and our phones didn't change anything. We are connected more than ever. We are bombarded with messages, and all of this crowded information ecosystem is also driven, as you said, by capitalistic kind of motivations. So not only are we bombarded with an unprecedented amount of information that we did not evolve to process 24/7 a day, also that information is being prioritized and organized and distributed through the lens of the attention economy. Simply put, basically companies like Facebook or YouTube or even newspapers like CNN.com or the New York Times trying to throw at us the most engaging, the most attention grabbing information at any given moment. So the information environment now is very fertile for the spread of misinformation. And the second process that is kind of worth mentioning is that the political landscape has changed a lot. I mentioned George H.W. Bush before, and it should be noted that the what we call the Trump era actually started a few decades ago. I mean, we can see across time how, especially on the American right, there is no symmetry here. How relationship with the truth, how the centrality of evidence and facts began to deteriorate over time across a lot of kind of areas of life. But prime among them, I think, is science. I mean, one of the worrisome things of our moment, most worrisome, is the polarization of science in a way that makes conservatives and Republicans way more susceptible to misinformation that is not in line with the scientific consensus. It's not because conservatives are not as smart or not as capable, and it's not because liberals are not capable of falling for misinformation. Of course they are. But the elites, be it the media, take anything from Rush Limbaugh in the 80s to Tucker Carlson today, and the political establishment from Marjorie Taylor Greene to Donald Trump himself, are just allowing misinformation to spread and do very, very little to punish, by which I mean politically punish, those who do not stick with facts. So if you take these two, you take the political and the information environment together, they're a very potent combination for the spread of misinformation.
Yeah, and I agree with you on that. I wonder about, particularly in the case of science, kind of there's two factors. I wonder if you can speak to. One is how much the for-profit model of big pharma plays a role in spreading skepticism. I think that conflict of interest is what drives some people to reject science because they think they're rejecting big pharma. Is basically what I'm getting at there. I'm not suggesting that we should reject all scientific
Right,
research,
right.
but I think that conflict of interest is one thing. And then a second thing is, and I think this is lost to history, but the COVID really allowed people to politicize science in a way that I hadn't seen before. And as you pointed out, it was a long time coming due to like
Yeah.
the Rush Limbaugh, Tucker Carlson's of the world. But I mean, we're talking a lot about Republicans. Obviously, there's one in the White House, but Democrats played a role here. I mean, I think they really deified Anthony Fauci while he was giving mixed messages on things like masks and vaccines. And then, of course, and this is lost history again, in toward the end of Donald Trump's first term, there were people out there like Kamala Harris, who was then a vice presidential candidate, saying she wouldn't get the vaccine because it came from Trump's Operation Warp Speed.
If the Trump administration approves a vaccine before or after the election, should Americans take it, and would you take it?
If the public health professionals, if Dr. Fauci, if the doctors tell us that we should take it, I'll be the first in line to take it. Absolutely. But if Donald Trump tells us that we should take it, I'm not taking it.
I will say that I would not trust Donald Trump, and it would have to be a credible source of information that talks about the efficacy and the reliability of whatever he's talking about. I will not take his word for it. He wants us to inject bleach. No, I will not take his word.
A lot of that stuff got taken down off the internet after she got elected, and the Democrats changed their messaging because now they're in power, and they recognize that the vaccine was for good health. So I wonder also, can you speak to a little bit about that, about the conflict of interest with for-profit and big pharma, and how the Democrats themselves politicized? Because I think that contributed to the bad framework for science that Republicans had already created.
Yeah. I'll try to put everything together because you raised a couple of issues. I believe that the way in which big money coming from corporations is tied to the development of medicine and vaccines and everything else is problematic. I think many of us agree that the system as it is not doing well on many of these regards. We do have a history of mistakes or cover-ups and all kind of problematic behaviors from interested parties in the medical establishment before. So I have nothing but empathy to people who are worried about about side effects or about not necessarily getting the best treatment. John Oliver just did a segment on MAHA, on Make America Healthy Again. And he says at the beginning of the show, he says, like, everybody suffered from the medical establishment at some point, right? I mean, we were all disappointed by our doctors at some point. And that's fine. That's fine. But that doesn't mean that every, crook or peddler of snake oil out there is giving us something better. and sometimes it feels like instead of trying to fix some of the issues that we really do have in the scientific kind of enterprise, we instead kind of reject it wholeheartedly and accept alternative ways of knowing that are much, much worse. That takes me back to your question about Trump and the Democrats and so on and so on. We've seen the attack on science going back to the basically 50s. You started to see signs that back then it was more intellectual conservatives kind of saying that science is, let's say, hostile to conservative points of view and to religion and to Christianity, of course, specifically. And then from there, it just got worse and worse. In the 70s and 80s, you already had clashes between Nixon and Reagan and scientific advisors. But still, largely, science was not politicized. It's quite interesting, by the way, to see that even though Nixon got into all kind of fights with scientists, and even though Reagan was already saying all kind of wrong things about volcanoes being responsible for pollution and so on and so on, more than cars and factories. Um, yeah, that's the 80s. I mean, we tend to forget, right? But even though Republicans began to stray away from scientific evidence in the 70s and 80s, Republicans and conservatives still trusted scientists. Actually, they trusted scientists until very, very, very recently. So something happened, let's say between the 90s and now, that kind of led to a massive drop in conservative citizens. I'm not talking about elites. Um, Relationship with science and scientists. And from the data, if you try to pinpoint the moment, it seems that the Tea Party was kind of the breakthrough kind of moment in time when suddenly everything became political. Suddenly everything that the government was funding or everything that the Obama administration was working to promote was kind of colored in very strong resistance. Now we know that resistance had some racial undertones and so on and so on.
Yeah, I was going to
I
say
don't want
that.
to I don't want to go there necessarily, but the way they framed it, okay, the way they claimed, like the reason they claimed they resisted Obama's policies was that it came from the government and everything government is bad and we need to kind of break down all those governmental enterprises, and science is one of them. I mean, to a large degree science is being funded by the federal government. I mean, now we of course face some of the consequences of this problematic and fragile relationship, but that's the case. If you're looking for the origins of that, you can go back to the 90s and the early 2000s, where billionaires who had a clear interest to fight the science, let's say, of climate change, because it pushed for regulation over their businesses, began to heavily fund Republicans and began to spill a lot of money into politics that was tied to attacks on the integrity of science. So again, it's a long process. It took a while. It culminated, I think, among the political elites in the early 2000s. I'm talking about the George Bush administration, the second Bush. I'm talking about Fox News, of course, conservative radio, but it only spilled over into the population in around 2013, 14. Now, as for Democrats, because you asked about Harris, I don't think the Democrats are perfect. I would never argue that. And I think the Democrats have made a lot of mistakes over the years, part of why they are, where they are now, politically speaking. But I think we should be fair and say that when a person from the party, let's say Harris, let's say somebody else, is saying something that is scientifically wrong, or let's say in contrast with scientific consensus, the party pushes them to take it back. They are often forced to debunk it. And as you said, they actually remove some of these remarks from the landscape, which sounds like they're hiding something, but another interpretation is that they are willing to admit mistakes, right? And we see the same thing happening on left and right media. I mean, of course, MSNBC make mistakes. And of course, CNN make mistakes sometimes, but they take the words back. They make corrections. They say, okay, we made a mistake. We're sorry. It happens. All of us are humans. All of us make mistakes. All of us might, here and there politicize science. Biden did it too, by the way. His slogan at the time was choose science over fiction, which also kind of implied that science is a left wing thing and that Republicans don't understand anything about it. We all make mistakes. The question is, how do we respond to them? How do we move forward? And so far, there is an asymmetry in how elites on both sides are treating misinformation.
That's true. I mean, I will say on the corrections front, I think, I mean, generally, I agree with you on that. But I mean, there has been this kind of ghost edit mode that a lot of legacy media have gone into recently, where because there's been so much pressure on them due to the attacks of which call them so-called fake news, but like Trump people, they are going back and fixing their mistakes, but they're no longer admitting corrections because it's interpreted in the public as like failing at their job, right? So I just want to throw that caveat in there that that's been a change in
Yeah,
the industry. But
yeah,
other
yeah.
than that,
And
totally agree.
and knowing your own work, I bet we're gonna talk about media literacy at some point, and I think that that's part of the problem. People like the public don't understand how media work, and they don't understand how science works. And in some of our studies, we look at self corrections in science. I mean, cases where there is a big study that creates a lot of draws a lot of attention in the media and in the public, and then somebody replicates it and realizes that the study was wrong. People interpret it as a crisis. I mean, people say, okay, we can't trust science anymore because here there was a big study and it was wrong. But that's not how science works. I mean, the self-correcting nature of science is what makes it so reliable, right? And the self-correcting nature of the news makes the news more reliable because they're gonna make mistakes. I mean, that's part of the job, definitely in this competitive environment. But they are willing to take it back. They are willing to correct themselves. But as you said, and I think you're completely right, the public doesn't understand it. They see it as weakness or as admitting that they're fake news or something. And this is where literacy education kind of programs should come in and teach people how the news work and what is a correction, right? And why do media outlets use it? What is a replication in science and why do scientists use it? And then you kind of reframe something that was maybe wrongfully perceived as failure. You reframe it as part of a healthy process, right? So again, the way to move forward here is to better educate the public, but it's easier, said than done.
As we know.
Yeah.
So let's get to that. Your book is not all about just discussing the problem and what factors contribute to it. You have a part in here about intervening.
Yeah.
So talk to us about some of the strategies or important areas to focus on for fighting some of the negative effects of so-called misinformation, fake news, disinformation, whatever it may be.
Yeah, I think we should think about corrections and interventions on two levels. One is focused on individuals, basically trying to help people like me, you, and everybody listening to our podcast to do better choices. And there is a lot of research into the kind of psychological mechanisms of misinformation, trying to understand why people fall for it, and then creating interventions that kind of challenge these reasons. And the second part is to change things systematically, which is kind of reconsidering our political system or reconsidering our legal system, reconsidering our media environment. Big questions like that. Now, the bad news is that despite a massive growth in research, we are still pretty terrible on both fronts. We're not doing very well. We tried to give people all kind of educational tools, and actually some of it works. I mean, we do understand now better why people fall for misinformation, so we can kind of create maybe tailored communications or kind of build all kind of educational models to help them. But so far, it didn't solve much. I think to a degree because it's really hard to scale it up. So we build something that works really nicely in a lab or in a research environment, and then it's really hard to get, let's say, the whole of the United States to adopt this new educational program. Um, on the systemic level, we are failing miserably. I mean, we're really, really, really not even close to solving the media or legal or political challenges that drive misinformation. Take media, for example, just as an example. I mean, the whole mainstream media enterprise is weak and fragile and susceptible due to its commercial structure. The inevitable tie to advertising money has made the American media particularly vulnerable to misinformation, and we rejected a lot of alternatives, such as the public kind of broadcasting structure that, let's say, England has, that has its own issues, but also has some advantages. When it comes to social media, as I'm sure you know, we still regulate social media with laws that were designed to make sense of telephone lines, basically. So Section 230, that's very commonly discussed these days, that kind of basically provides safety net for social media companies from any lawsuits about around misinformation and hate speech and so on. It was designed in the 90s to basically protect companies like AT&T. The idea was, if two terrorists are kind of coordinating their attack over your phone line, basically the government wouldn't be able to sue the phone company for those damages. But we're not living in the 90s anymore. And even in the 90s, thinking about phone lines was a bit obsolete, right? And treating people like Zuckerberg or Elon Musk as if they have no editorial role or, no influence over the content of what's happening on their platform is ridiculous. Interestingly, by the way, if you want to understand why we are failing so miserably, both parties actually agree that Section 230 is terrible. I mean, Republicans hate it and Democrats hate it, but we are so polarized that we just can't work across the aisle anymore. So they can't come together to fight even something that they agree on, right? So there are solutions. We can restructure social media. We can build a stronger journalistic model that's not so reliant on advertising money, especially in today's environment where that money is almost, gone. We can improve our education system. We can teach people, students, kids, how to identify misinformation better. But to do that, we need to come together as a society. We need to agree. We need to be more bipartisan. And I just don't see it happening anytime soon. So we have a bunch of solutions that me and you and others have been working really hard to design and test in research studies. But we are working within a system that doesn't help us, bring those visions into reality.
Can just a follow up question on this? Because I'm sorry, I find this really fascinating. I know it
Yeah, of
seems a
course.
little off topic, but you're talking about Section 230, and I want to know a little more about why you say both parties are opposed to it. Because I remember in the last days of the first Trump administration, the Democrats in Congress rhetorically said they would give a $2,000 check to people. Trump agreed, but congressional Republicans were opposed to it. And so the way McConnell wiggled his way out was he put the bill on the Senate floor, but he tied it to a bill to repeal Section 230. And that's why it went down in flames. So I wonder, do you think is what you're saying basically the last 5 years with the shift of big tech oligarchs either helping out Democrats by moderating content online that angered Republicans, and then 4 years later now going back on all that and aligning with Trump, which is angering Democrats? Is that why you think now there would be like more resistance to Section 230 than say like
Yeah.
5 years ago? Is that
I mean, I don't think it's going to be an outlandish claim to make if I would say that Trump's opinion on things like regulation is very tightly tied to his, political benefits or dangers at any specific moment, and he can flip flop, a million times on the same issue, based on who's in charge. Like he behaves differently when Biden is the president and he's the president. and his relationships, the momentary relationship with the CEOs of these companies. During Biden's time in office, especially as those companies were busy kind of investigating the January 6th insurrection and so on, Trump was very hostile towards social media companies and the people at the top of them. He blamed them for being liberals and for spreading misinformation about him and for obviously removing, deplatforming him after January 6th and so on and so on. Then, when he was running again and it became obvious that people like Musk and Zuckerberg are willing to get closer to him and it's to his agenda, he changed his tone a little bit. Now, with Trump, it's always hard, to fully understand where he stands on things because he kind of warmed up to these people and then he fought with them again, and it can move back and forth many times. But what I'm trying to say is that I don't know if there is at the moment a coherent Republican stand on regulation of misinformation. It seems to be changing based on what's convenient in any given moment. The Democrats do a little better, but also they didn't offer any good alternative yet. So, yeah, it's complicated in part because this administration changes its mind on things so often, right?
Absolutely. All right. So Yotam Ophir, this is a associate professor of communication at University at Buffalo. The book is Misinformation and Society. Where can folks go to follow more of your work and pick up a copy of this book?
The book is available everywhere. Selling books, it's on Amazon, it's on Wiley, that's the publisher itself. So Wiley.com has it. Barnes and Noble has it on its website, and so on and so on. And yeah, people can check out, I guess, the first chapter or so on Kindle or on Google Books and see if it speaks to them. I hope it will.
Oh, you got any social media you want to plug, or should people leave you alone?
I used to be very active on Twitter, like very active, and I believe in science communication, so I did my very best to make my research kind of accessible to people, but I just couldn't do it after the Musk acquisition. I mean, the website just turned into yet another cesspool of misinformation and anti-Semitism and whatnot. So I tried to move to Blue Sky and all these places. I'm kind of a little bit there. These days, I think I don't know, I do a little bit of LinkedIn, apparently. I'm not a huge fan of the whole LinkedIn culture, but I use it as a place to kind of keep, non-professionals up to date on the work that we're doing. So weirdly enough, I would never expect it, but LinkedIn is where I currently update about my research. Yeah.
All right. Yotam Ophir, again, the book, Misinformation Society. You can find him hiding somewhere in a LinkedIn near you. Thank you so much for coming on the Disinfo Detox. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you, Nolan.
All right. Thank you, Detoxers. See you next time.